Ireland's former Parliament House, a seminal work of Palladian public architecture, occupies a key place in Dublin's urban landscape, a focal point in the city's fabric where past, present and future visions of the city connect. For almost 300 years, it has stood as a potent presence in the city's consciousness, a place of public gathering, of pomp and ceremony, of protest and revolt, celebration and resort. Following the bloody outbreak of rebellion in 1798, inspired by revolutionary France, the Act of Union of 1801 brought an end to Ireland's Parliament, and the sale of the building to the Bank of Ireland. In the subsequent 120 years, Dublin's Parliament remained at once an enduring emblem of the country's lost independence and of colonial Protestant power. In the 21st century, its current and future role continues to inspire debate.
The idea of the project is to try to reimagine the interior of the Parliament as it once was. This is a building that was heavily remodelled after it became a bank following the Act of Union in the early 1800s, which effectively erased the original sequence of spaces along the central axis of the building. So we're interested in digitally restoring these rooms and the lost vistas through them, along with the original light sources, the original materials, the surface textures, all of the things that would have contributed to the Parliament's original early 18th century character. And so we hope to open up a new dialogue with the building and the craft techniques that underpinned it.
The first large-scale public Neo-Palladian building in Ireland and Britain, and the world's first purpose-built bicameral Parliament House. Its pioneering design was by Edward Lovett Pearce, a brilliant young architect of untested skill but unbounded vision.
Edward Lovett Pearce is something of an enigma. The young man, probably only in his early 30s when he designed the Parliament, he was then a relatively unknown figure on the architectural stage and hadn't been involved in any other works of this magnitude. He did, however, have pedigree. His cousin, Sir John Vanbrugh, was a celebrated architect of Blenheim Palace. His uncle, General Thomas Pearce, a highly decorated British military officer, while he himself was a member of the Irish House of Commons, and his patron, none other than the Speaker, William Connolly.
We know little of his architectural training, aside from a lengthy grand tour through Europe in the early years of the 1720s. Having navigated the backwaters of the Veneto with Palladio's Quattro Libri in hand, he returned to Dublin, where he won over the building committee with his talk of Vitruvius and snatched this prestigious commission from under the nose of the Surveyor General, Thomas Burr. The building of a new Parliament House in Dublin in 1729 was a bold statement, an assertion of political power, of architectural ambition and economic investment, which yielded an exceptional work of architecture. Facing College Green is a deep, pedimented, colonnaded forecourt, accommodating the processional entrance of Commons and Lords through monumental twin porticos. The 22 giant Ionic columns, constructed of 7 short and long segments, are of Portland stone.
Portland stone, a fine-grained limestone from Dorset, was prized for its smooth, creamy finish, thought to imitate marble. It was, however, problematic to extract and expensive to transport, so is used somewhat sparingly here for the structural orders, decorative mouldings, and the carved architectural details. Granite, by contrast, is a coarser, grittier stone with distinctive silver flecks of mica. It's harder to work than limestone, but produces a robust, textured effect that has particular impact in an urban environment. It was local too, quarried in the Dublin and Wicklow Mountains, so cheaper and easier to transport.
The survival of the House of Lords is a huge resource for this project. The original fabric is still very much intact. You've got the beautifully wainscoted walls in oak, the coffered plaster ceiling, a barrel vault in the centre, and curvilinear in the apse at one end. A real showpiece in architectural terms, but it provides us an insight into the craft techniques that were used by early 18th century craftsmen in a space like this. The oak columns, for example, are not cut out of single blocks of oak. In fact, they're spliced together from quite narrow sections of oak and joined together around a hollow core. This is a technique that's quite commonly used in the 18th century. It kind of shows the way in which the model surface is very much a sort of a stage managed event. If something is designed to look a certain way, it doesn't necessarily reflect that in its structure.
The names of the master craftsmen responsible for these effects also survive. The joinery was by John Armstead, plasterwork by William Spencer and Edward Cooley, while the wonderfully expressive Kentian oak chimney piece is likely the work of John Houghton, who carved in both timber and stone.
Only one detailed view survives showing the interior of the House of Commons, painted by the artist Francis Wheatley in 1780 as a group portrait of elected MPs, designed to commemorate a speech by Irish patriot Henry Grattan, urging for a repeal of Poyning's law, which for centuries had subjugated the Irish Parliament to that at Westminster. 12 years later, on the 27th of February 1792, the room was destroyed by fire. A short-lived reconstruction on a circular plan was swept away when the interior was once again altered to serve as a bank in the years after 1800. Today, the spaces of the octagonal Commons and the Court of Requests are occupied by Francis Johnson's Cash Office, itself an important work of neoclassical architecture.
Although much of the physical fabric has been lost, records of what once was do survive, from visual sources such as paintings and architectural drawings to archival material and parliamentary reports. These resources, however fragmentary, allow us to piece back together a picture of the original interiors.
In the 21st century, as our social interactions bend ever more towards the virtual, the notion of reoccupying the Irish House of Commons once more comes into view, summoned up from a sort of psychic bedrock of the city, if you will. If people can be taught to haunt buildings, buildings like this haunt cities. If the virtual, remembered and imagined buildings seem ephemeral, they are perhaps less so than the inevitably transient bricks and mortar buildings of our cities that fade away with use and time.
The destruction of the House of Commons, first by fire, then by remodelling, did not see an end to its cultural significance, which lingered through pictorial media as the embodiment of Irish legislative independence. This early 20th century painting celebrates the passing of the Irish Home Rule Bill in 1914, imagining key Home Rule party figures, some of whom, such as Charles Stewart Parnell, were then dead, standing in the vanished House of Commons, looking forward to its re-establishment. In its architectural detail, it shows variations on the space derived from earlier Victorian renderings, and in this way becomes part of a lineage of imaginative remodellings of the iconic space.
Digital technology is bringing a new pliability to the city, where with virtual and augmented reality it might be possible to create more active intersections between the architectures of different epochs and re-inhabit parts of the city we long thought were confined to history. In this sense, the stratigraphy of the city can be redeployed to create a more deeply, richly textured sense of place.